Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch AM from Graham. Ahead today, the battle over freedom of speech and religious liberty at the U.S. Supreme Court. The justice is hearing a key case involving whether a Christian website designer can be forced to build a site proclaiming a message that violates her conscience.
I am a Christian, and as a Christian, I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman.
We'll hear the arguments from the court and look at the implications of the important case. After weeks of campaigning and record early voting, it's finally election day in the runoff race for the Senate in Georgia between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. And although the Democrats now have control of the Senate, both sides know the outcome of this race is still important.
The difference between a 50-50 Senate, which I've seen over the last 2 years, and a 51-49 Senate is pretty significant.
Why a win today could give Democrats more power in the Senate. Could America's power grid be attacked by a foreign power? Experts say yes, because there's a back door and China holds the key.
What they have is the ability today, they have their finger on that trigger today, that they can take over that transformer and everything that transformer supplies coming in or going out. This is a very big deal.
We'll explain how it could be hit and what needs to be done. And are you getting enough sleep? Because if you're not, it could be bad for your health.
And on the shorter end, like when we get less than 5 hours, that is certainly kind of a risk factor for lots of negative health outcomes.
Why sleep can protect your health, including against viruses in this flu season. Those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
Let's begin in Washington, where the Supreme Court heard arguments in a major case Monday pitting the First Amendment protections on free speech and religious freedom against an anti-discrimination law protecting LGBTQ rights in Colorado. Protesters on both sides were out in force in front of the Marble Palace. The 9 justices on the High Court hearing arguments on whether business owners can refuse to work on same-sex weddings due to religious beliefs and free speech. CBN News senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener has our top story.
Lori Smith wants to expand her business to create wedding websites, but she only wants to tell the stories of brides and grooms through God's lens. She does not want to create them for same-sex couples.
I am a Christian, and as a Christian, I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman.
The case 303 Creative versus Elenis is a challenge by a Colorado website designer to a state law that bars businesses that are open to the public from discriminating against gay people or announcing intent to do so.
I'm never refusing a project based on who's requesting the work, but the message that I'm being asked to pour my time, talents into promoting and celebrating.
Colorado, though, sees denying service to same-sex marriage as discrimination.
If you're open to the public, you need to accommodate everybody. That's a core of our civil rights law, and it has deep roots in American law.
After several years of litigation, Smith's case reached the Supreme Court after the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against Smith. Judge Timothy Timkovich, writing for that court's minority, pointed out, the majority takes the remarkable and novel stance that the government may force Ms. Smith to produce messages that violate her conscience. Taken to its logical end, the government could regulate the messages communicated by all artists. Smith's attorneys focused on their clients' free speech.
She serves all people, deciding what to create based on the message, not who requests it. But Colorado declares her speech a public accommodation and insists that she create and speak messages that violate her conscience.
The company just cannot refuse to serve gay couples, as it seeks to do here, just as the Christmas store cannot announce no Jews allowed.
This case follows a narrow ruling in favor of a Colorado baker represented by the same conservative group, who argued he should not be forced to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple.
If it's not something I will say, then it's not something I will write on a cake.
The Heritage Foundation says the stakes are high for religious liberty and the First Amendment.
Regardless of how the Supreme Court rules, and we're hoping that they rule in favor of free speech, it will be a ruling that will ultimately bind everyone, regardless of religious perspectives on marriage.
In the end, the Supreme Court will decide if one overrules the other, but Smith's counsel believes that a victory for Smith is a victory for all beliefs and viewpoints. At the Supreme Court, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
We turn now to the runoff race in Georgia for the Senate, where voters are going to the polls today to choose between incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock and challenger Herschel Walker. After several days of record early voting, CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka has been tracking this race throughout the election season. And he brings us this look at why this race has important implications for the Senate and both parties.
Well, at one point, analysts predicted this race as the one that could tip the scales for control of the Senate. Since Democrats have already locked up the chamber, this race may not be the priority it was once thought to be, but that doesn't mean it's any less important. Every vote counts as both candidates make their closing arguments around the Peach State.
This is what I'm going to tell you. We are the people of God. And no one's going to hurt God's people. Not on my watch they will, because I'm going to protect my family. I'm going to protect Georgia. I'm going to protect the United States of America.
I'm glad to be in a church tonight because it is my faith that has driven me into public service. You don't have a senator who used to be a pastor. You have a pastor in the Senate.
While Warnock edged out Walker in November's general election in a close and contested race, neither candidate got more than 50% of the vote, triggering this runoff. Walker hopes Georgia Governor Brian Kemp's popularity and support can get him across the finish line.
That's why I'm backing Herschel, and I hope you'll join me in voting for him too.
While Warnock brought back former President Obama in the closing days.
Some folks are asking, well, if Democrats already have control of the Senate, why does this matter? What's the difference between 50 and 51? The answer is a lot.
The Senate has been deadlocked 50-50 for the past 2 years, with the vice president being the deciding vote. A Warnock victory would give Democrats more power, something not lost on current members.
The difference between a 50-50 Senate, which I've seen over the last 2 years, and a 51-49 Senate is pretty significant. Just look at the way our committees are structured. Our committees are evenly divided. That means Democrats can't pass legislation out of the committees without at least one Republican supporting them.
51-49 is very close. We have a country that needs us to come together. The country wants unity. Whether it's 50-50, 51-49, we have got to work on what's best interest for the citizens of this great country and bringing it back together.
A condensed early voting period for the runoff has shattered previous records, with more than 1.8 million Georgians already voting before Election Day.
You know, people just show up, and you don't know how many will show up. But what we're seeing right now, voters are energized on both sides of the aisle. A lot of money is being spent here on TV. I'm sure people can't wait for that to be over. But I think we'll have strong turnout on Tuesday.
After analyzing state public voting data, GeorgiaVotes.com has determined that almost 80,000 people who did not vote in the general election have already early voted for the runoff. Matt Galka, CBN News.
Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra has confirmed the Biden administration supports using taxpayer dollars to cover gender transition procedures for minors and adults when a healthcare provider has determined it is, quote, medically necessary. The Daily Caller reports Becerra made this statement in a written testimony to a House committee last week. In response, Republican Representative Mary Miller tweeted, Biden HHS Secretary has now confirmed the Biden administration is using taxpayer dollars to push young children to have sex gender change operations, and take dangerous chemicals that do permanent damage to their bodies. Family, friends, and the Mission Aviation Fellowship are asking Christians around the world to pray for the safety and swift release of an American missionary pilot who was detained in Mozambique on November 4th. 31-year-old Ryan Kaur, seen here with his family, has been taken into custody by officials in Mozambique while preparing to fly vitamins and other supplies to church-run orphanages inside the country. Kaur was detained along with 2 South African volunteers because of suspicions their flight was in support of insurgent activity. He's currently being held in a high-security Mozambique prison. That is according to KTVB-TV. And you can find out more about his situation at CBNNews.com. Coming up, could America's power source be attacked? The answer is yes, because there's a backdoor to our electric grid. And guess who's got the key? China. We're going to bring you this story when we come back. In North Carolina, tens of thousands of people are braced for days without electricity. In a county where authorities say 2 power substations were shot up by 1 or more people who apparently had criminal intent, power is being restored gradually. And Governor Roy Cooper said state and federal investigators are leaving no stone unturned in this investigation to find those who are responsible. The incident again raises the question of possible attacks on America's power grid and the difficulty of defending it. As it turns out, there is a back door to the electric grid, and China holds the key. As CBN News has reported, while most of the focus has been on network security, experts are warning that a major attack on our critical infrastructure could be imminent. Caitlin Burke has this look at the threat that's been largely ignored.
Substations like this one are in almost every city nationwide. Most house transformers, which are a huge part of getting power out to you. The larger they are, the more critical.
Transformers have been called by many people the Achilles heel of the electric grid.
Transformers take voltage sent by power plants and convert it to a level that can be distributed. Essentially, they keep electricity flowing at safe levels. While the U.S. electric grid consists of thousands of them, the high voltage carriers make up less than 3%. Even so, they're responsible for transporting 60 to 70% of our electricity.
These are 500-ton, 20 feet tall, multi-million-dollar machines.
They're also custom made in China. And experts like Joe Weiss say while the U.S. is busy securing its networks, China has the ability and opportunity to sabotage the equipment we rely on them to manufacture, essentially creating a backdoor into our electric grid.
What they have is the ability today, they have their finger on that trigger today, that they can take over that transformer and everything that transformer supplies coming in or going out. This is a very big deal.
Weiss, an engineer and independent consultant, says this is no hypothetical warning. The U.S. has already discovered backdoor electronics in a Chinese-made transformer. It was that discovery that led then-President Trump to sign an executive order in May of 2020 banning the acquisition, importation, transfer, or installation of any bulk power systems from foreign adversaries. The discovery also led to something that's never happened before.
The next large transformer from China that arrived at the Port of Houston was intercepted by the U.S. Department of Energy and taken to the Sandia National Laboratory. Remember, this is a 500-ton, multi-million-dollar machine. So there was a utility missing.
Llewellyn King is a journalist who's been covering the energy field for decades. When he approached the Department of Energy about the missing transformer, he was met with a veil of silence.
No comment is, to me, very much a comment. It says there's smoke and there must be fire.
So not only do our domestic utilities not know what's being found, our closest allies, who also have Chinese-made transformers, do not know what has been found.
There are more than 200 of these large Chinese transformers in our electric grid today. One accounts for 10% of the power going to New York City. Another supplies 18 to 20% of the power going to Las Vegas. And yet, the U.S. is focused on our cyber networks, something China has already proven it can bypass.
Instead of trying to hack all of these networks and everything else to try to get in, all they did was put in some hardware that will allow them to send signals. So instead of sending a voltage signal that's coming from a voltage sensor in that transformer, they can send a signal from Beijing into that piece of equipment.
In November of 2020, an Arctic blast froze 40% of the Texas electric grid. Millions of homes and businesses were left without power. The outages lasted only days, and yet more than 100 people died. Back in 2012, then Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta warned a room full of business leaders about the scope of a true attack on the U.S. grid.
The collective result of these kinds of attacks could be a cyber Pearl Harbor, an attack that would cause physical destruction and the loss of life, an attack that would paralyze and shock the nation and create a new profound sense of vulnerability.
Weiss says the question is not if this kind of attack will happen, but rather, will we even know it was a cyber attack?
What a sophisticated attacker will do, and Russia and China, even Iran and North Korea now fit in this. They will make a cyber attack look like an equipment malfunction.
He points to Stuxnet, the U.S. cyber attack that took out a fifth of Iran's nuclear centrifuges.
For a year, an entire year, the centrifuges were being destroyed. The people inside could hear those centrifuges screaming. They never even thought that cyber was the problem. They simply viewed it as a systemic design flaw.
Experts like Weiss stress that our critical infrastructure is made up of engineering equipment, and it will take a partnership between engineers and cybersecurity defenders to truly protect it.
Our workforce is not trained to address this. The people that understand the equipment have no training in cybersecurity. The people who understand cybersecurity are not trained to understand how an electric grid or a pipeline or anything else works.
This backdoor threat from our adversaries applies to all of our critical infrastructure, not just the grid.
Much of that same equipment is used in all other industries. So what's a weak spot for the electric industry is just as much a weak spot for every other industry.
The parts that make up this critical infrastructure are also old, and as we've seen in Texas, susceptible to extreme weather events. So whether it's malicious or unintentional, if these systems go down, it will be months, if not years, before we get them back, making us truly vulnerable. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Still ahead, there's a simple way you can be 4 times more likely to stay healthy if you get hit by a virus this winter. Go to sleep. We'll tell you what you need to do and not to do to ensure you get a good night's rest right after this. A triple-demic of COVID, flu, and respiratory illness is now on the rise. One way you can fight it is to get plenty of rest. Research shows people who don't get enough sleep are 4 times more likely to catch a cold than people exposed to the same virus who do get ample sleep. Here's medical reporter Lori Johnson with some tips on how to get a good night's rest.
Scientific evidence shows that how much we sleep directly relates to our immune system function. Getting plenty of Z's helps repair just about every system within our bodies.
When people get the sleep they need, they're more productive, they're more creative, they are better partners, they're better parents, they're more empathetic, and their health is much better off, both our mental health as well as our physical health.
Most adults need about 8 hours a night to feel refreshed and ready for the next day.
And on the shorter end, like when we get less than 5 hours, that is certainly kind of a risk factor for lots of negative health outcomes.
Anxiety often creates a barrier to sleep. People who struggle with this should consider preparing for bedtime a full 2 hours before lights out. That means moving from work, news, and electronics to something more calming, familiar, and pleasant.
Oftentimes people treat themselves like they're computers, that you can just kind of flip the off switch and then kind of go to sleep. And that's just not how the body works.
Setting your alarm clock so that you wake up at the same time every day, even on the weekends, is a useful tip to help gain control over when our body naturally gets sleepy, also known as circadian rhythm.
One of the things that happens with insomnia is that people try to kind of adjust their wake time based on how their night was, right? So like they have a bad night of sleep and they'll sleep in an extra 2 hours. But what that does is it kind of throws the whole system off. It actually kind of puts you in jet lag without having any of the benefits of traveling.
If you often toss and turn in the middle of the night, try getting up and moving to a different location like the couch. That can help your brain not associate anxiety with your bed, something called conditioned arousal.
So, you have your angstiness and your bed, and you need to break those apart and wait until you get sleepy again. So you don't want to turn on all the lights. You don't want to do anything really active. You want to go back to those relaxing things that are known to kind of bring on that sleepiness for you. And when you begin to feel sleepy again, you kind of repair that relationship so that, over time, when you get back in bed, the bed does what it's supposed to do, is cue you to fall asleep.
Exercise during the day tends to help us sleep well. So does a dark room that's a cool 65 degrees. On the other hand, things that can get in the way include caffeine and alcohol, which can suppress important dreaming or REM sleep.
The other thing that alcohol does is it's relaxing, right? It hits on those receptors in our brain that make us feel relaxed, but it wears off. And when it wears off, your brain notices, and that also leads to more awakening.
Also, try to avoid sleep medications and other aids.
Even if many of them are not physiologically addicting, they become almost immediately psychologically addicting, right? We start to wonder, can we sleep without these? And so it's a slippery slope to go down.
Lastly, head off worrying in bed by setting aside time during the day to make a list of your problems and the first step towards a solution. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Be right back with an encouraging word for the day ahead. Right after this, stay with us. Time now for your Tuesday Tweetable. Here's a message I hope will bless you, and you will post, tag, tweet, and share it with those in your circles of influence. What people think of you is actually none of your business, nor is it your problem. You live for an audience of one, and his thoughts towards you are always good. Live to please him. It's easier than you might think. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel at any time. You can also find them online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us. The address is newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Goodbye. God bless.